Hello, everyone, and welcome to our April edition of Voices for the West, a webinar series brought to you by Advocates for the West. My name is Will Shoemaker, and I am Communications and Engagement Director at Advocates for the West. For those of us who, or for those of you who are new to us, Advocates for the West is a nonprofit public interest environmental law firm, and we provide free legal services to conservation organizations, Native American tribes, and activists in all 11 Western states. I will apologize in advance at the beginning of this webinar. In the event that I begin referring to the webinar is occurring tonight, I am not actually on the other side of the globe, but rather we're trying something new with today's webinar in that we're having it midday as opposed to in the evening when our webinars have historically taken place. So apologies in advance for any reference to tonight. The title of today's webinar is At the Intersection of Art and Activism. We're honored to be joined by Rachel Teannalach, Miguel Almeida, M Acuff, and Britt Freda. Advocates for the West has a long history of partnering with artists to help move the needle on conservation. Of course, this all began with Rachel Teannalach, and we're honored to be joined by Rachel today. And since then, we've had the pleasure of partnering with Miguel and many other artists as well. So we are deeply grateful for the four artists that are with us today and are willing to highlight their work, the work of artists that they work closely with, as well as their perspectives on this important topic. Before we get started, I want to make a couple notes. At the bottom of your screen, you should see the chat section. And so that we can better get to know one another before we jump into the webinar, please take a minute and drop into the chat the location from where you're joining us. I am writing into the chat myself right now. Modern day Colorado, Ute ancestral lands. You will remain on mute throughout the course of the talks today. However, we do welcome your questions. And if a question comes to mind at any point during the course of the webinar, feel free to go ahead and drop it into the Q&A section. It's also located at the bottom of your screen, but I will point out that it's different from the chat. We'll get to as many of those questions as time allows toward the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to our artists, beginning with Rachel Teannalach. And Rachel, I will pull up for you our slides.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to see some names I know on the list who are present. So yeah, I began working with Advocates for the West in 2011 or 2012, so about 12 years ago. And I found out about them through my good friend Amy Moran, and she introduced me to Laird Lucas. And I'd been in Idaho painting for a couple of years at that point, had been a landscape painter for maybe 10 years before that, previously in California. And for me, landscape painting was a way of exploring Idaho. And I was going all over the state painting landscapes. And when I started talking to Laird, I became really interested in this idea of connecting my work to some of the conservation projects that they were involved in. So I believe that started our project Landscapes for the West. It was an exhibition that we put on. It was partially a fundraiser for advocates, but just a way of cross-pollinating and bringing the people that followed my work to that conservation side of things, of people who really wanted to protect the places that they found so beautiful. So for me, it was really meaningful to kind of put some ground underneath my feet and make what is a very solitary and sometimes frivolous feeling endeavor, the art making, a little bit navel gazing to put it in this bigger context and put it to use for an organization that I really felt strongly about. So next slide. So throughout the years since that Landscapes for the West project, I continued to work with conservation groups in Idaho. Next with Idaho Conservation League, I helped them start an artist in residence program that I think they toyed around with the idea previously, but I approached them and they asked me to be the first artist in residence, and that program continued. I think they just started it up again after a small break this year. And then I've also worked with the Conservation Voters for Idaho and Idaho Rivers United, and pretty much I became a little bit known as someone to approach for donations and help promoting any conservation cause in this area. So this painting, Daybreak in Sawtooth Valley, was one of the large pieces I created for a project called Confluence, which was intended to be a traveling show. It's a series of about 40 paintings that depict the landscapes along the Pacific salmon migration route from the headwaters of the Salmon River at Galena Pass to the Pacific Ocean. And it was started, I think, in 2019 or 20. And so obviously the pandemic got in the way of traveling the show, although we did have a couple locations. We did a showing in Moscow, Idaho, in McCall, one in Ketchum and Stanley. So here and there, but not the full range of exhibits that we'd intended to. But in a way, I feel like people tuned in a little bit more because we were home more and maybe had a little more attention to spend, familiarizing ourselves with things that we believed in and really digging in deeper. So in a way, that digital platform worked really well in lieu of the traveling shows. So this is Daybreak in Sawtooth Valley. Next slide, please. This one is called Persist. And we've used this image a lot. It's one that I always offer and send when somebody's wanting an image to represent the plight of the salmon. A friend actually let me use this image. I didn't take this picture. I'm not a fisherman or a boater, so I had a little help from people to get certain images. But this one was also featured by Idaho Conservation League in the legislative updates. I made a tie for Jonathan Oppenheimer to wear at his session. So this has been a fun image to spread that specific message of the salmon with. Next image, please. And then this takes us to the end of the Pacific salmon migration route, or I guess the beginning, no matter, or depending on how you see it. But this is the confluence of the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean. And yeah, so after the Confluence project kind of wrapped up, we just still try to collaborate where we can, advocates and I, and whenever they can use images that I create, I'm happy to let them do so and really, put my work in the context of conservation. I think that's it.
Right. Sounds good. Thank you, Rachel. Miguel.
Hey everyone, my name is Miguel Almeida. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American visual artist and muralist here in Boise, Idaho. I kind of work in all sorts of areas, so I design a lot of stuff for like coffee shops around here. I run my own skateboarding company. I also do murals and do more public art as well, and I think that's kind of where I get some of that activism in my work. I come from a long line of immigrant farm workers, so I understand and know the exploitation that our immigrant farm working community goes through, how they're taken advantage and how they're always, the lack of resources they're provided. So that side of my work always involves like, either me bringing light to it, whether it's just like, painting the farm workers, doing the labor. A lot of times I do try to celebrate them because I do feel like their work should be celebrated. And oftentimes, through that work, people have come to realize where their food comes from, even at an early age. I've had talks with like elementary kids, and they wrote me back saying that they had no idea or they never really thought about where their food came from or who picked it, which I think is very important. And we can go to the next slide. And then here's a mural I did out in Caldwell, Idaho. This one's depicting some street vendors and a farm worker in the center. This one for me, I grew up in Caldwell, Idaho. I didn't really have a whole lot of art that I feel like told my story or represented or saw myself, in public art. So this one was a very special one because I got to paint people that looked familiar to me, like my aunts, my uncles, my parents. I even met a cousin on the construction site painting this that I had no idea. So it goes to show like the power of representation and just kind of, putting these large scale works out in the public, especially in areas where we're not very represented. And we can go to the next slide. And then this project was with Family Health Services. They reached out to me because they have a large immigrant farm working community out in that area. And they were noticing that a lot of them, either weren't seeking some like medical help or anything when they were like having any issues because of the fear of like their status, if they were undocumented, or the fact that, maybe these places didn't speak English. So they reached out to me and wanted to create something to let them know, like, hey, we're here to help, like just to assure them that there's a place, near them that in case they have any medical needs that they could trust. So this piece was done digitally and then printed on a billboard and it's out in Shoshone, Idaho. Next slide. And then this was a library card I designed for here in the city of Boise. A lot of times my work does involve animals, a character interacting with the animals or like some plants. And to me, it's just always nice to include all this. And I feel like this is where like the kid side of me comes out in art, because I feel like I have two parts, the one that wants to, tell stories about farm workers and like shed light on what they go through, but also the other part of me wants to create something that's more just fantasy based. And it's usually like, interacting with animals and plants. I'm a huge lover of animals. I care deeply about them. So a lot of times, the interactions that I'm showing are, something like this, where it's like either the environment's taking care of the character, like a plant, like holding a character, or it's the character caring for the animal or the plant. And that's kind of the both sides of my work right there. And that's all.
All right. Thank you, Miguel. M.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good day. My name is M Acuff, and I am a professor of art, as you can see on the screen there, at Whitman College. My primary area that I cover within the curriculum of the department is sculpture. And I'm originally from Chicago, but have been living out here for close to 18 years. So when Will approached me, with the question about some sort of relationship between environmental art and environmental activism, I had to think a little bit. And my response initially was, there's not necessarily a linear one or causal one, but there is, I think, broadly strong sentiment and concern and fear for what's happening in the world around us in terms of the environment, and that is often getting put into the artwork, my own artwork, for example, and the work of my students. And so we decided today I would kind of focus my section on the Art ES program at Whitman that I helped design, that tries to allow students to kind of synthesize thinking from a scientific perspective about the environment, which is sort of the lingua franca, and how artists are looking at and making in response to what's happening. So it's obviously quite complicated. So I'm just going to give two examples. So maybe we'll go to the first slide of artworks that I used in my classes. The first is Mark Dion's Nucum Vivarium, which is in Seattle. So maybe there's people in the audience who have actually been to and experienced this artwork. So let's see. This is a piece from 2006. It's in the Seattle Art Museum's Sculpture Park. It might not be obvious to the general audience that this is actually an artwork, but it is adjacent physically to other more legible large kind of metal sculptural objects. But it does this purposefully. Its intention as an artwork is to kind of engage well beyond the aesthetic, sort of the ideological realm. And it asks questions through using almost science as a paintbrush or as a material. So what you're looking at is a hemlock tree laying down inside of what is understood as a greenhouse. And that hemlock tree was removed from the forest nearby, where it was functioning as a nurse log. So in the ecological vernacular, this is a tree that's lived its lifespan, has fallen to the forest floor, and now will continue to regenerate and produce life through its decomposition. So it's within this context here, it's a site of intense scientific management and expertise, like the water and the temperature and the humidity are all being controlled. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that, because I'm noticing the time. So I'm going to move to the next slide. And all of these works are related, so they won't be too big of a stretch. This is Mary Mattingly's work called Eve of a Spring Tide, and it's located at the Socrates Sculpture Park in New York City. And it came out of her own visceral experience of living in New York in apartments that would flood on occasion, and often experience a saltwater immersion intrusion from the relationship there between the rivers and the ocean. And she just dreamed up and built this elaborate structure that kind of mimics an apartment in terms of it's having many levels and ladders and the flow of water throughout this structure, which all kind of nourishes different plant life. So the artwork is basically a small scale ecosystem. People can forage from all of these plants, and it definitely requires a similar kind of maintenance as the Mark Dion, where people are attending to the flow of water throughout the piece. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a work that came out of the Art ES program by a former student now named Ramona Escayo. It's a work titled Spill, and there are 3 different images here. And the first image on your left is kind of tries to encapsulate the entire piece. There's 3 different elements to the piece, the main piece in this gallery. This is a senior thesis exhibition piece. So there's a sink, there's a tank, and there's a pump. And up in the right-hand corner, you can see the sink and the pump. And basically, not unlike the 2 previous works, this is a work that invites participation. You're able to wash your hands at the sink. But what it does make legible is the fact that this is a closed system. And so any water that I use to wash my hands is the same water that, Rachel or Britt or Miguel or Will would use to wash their hands. And so it sensuously allows you to have an experience of the fact that we are all existing within a closed system. The Earth is a closed system. Will, do you think we have time to show a little bit of that video?
I do, and I will cue that up right here.
So what I think the arts offer is a kind of nonverbal, experimental, visceral, aesthetic, and affective situation in which to generate new understandings about our relationship within these large systems. It's a place to do research and ask certain kinds of questions, which are, for the most part, without a commercial interest in mind. Like that does not dominate the decisions that are being made in the making of these images and objects. So I think that's where art's power is, from my perspective as a teacher. So that's all for me.
All right. Thank you, Em. Britt.
Hello, everybody. So glad you're all here. My name is Britt Freda. I am an artist who I've worked for decades on endangered species, social justice, and environmental conservation in my own work. But today I'm here as the creative director, wearing the hat of the creative director of Northwest Artists Against Extinction, which is an organization that is a project of Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition. And the organization was created about 3 years ago to bring artwork in the same vein that we're all talking about today into the public eye in a way that invites a different kind of connection and relationship in policy, public policy, education, honoring treaties, and specifically for our organization in work around the conservation and restoration of salmon runs on the Columbia River. We can go to the next slide. So I'm showing examples of 3 artists today. Austin Pasinich is a young artist. It's, I think, his freshman year at the University of Washington. He has done some incredible work as a young person. I'm always inspired by how much he's able to accomplish. He has worked with numerous organizations and communities, creating murals around saving salmon. Each of these murals exists on or near a river where salmon have been impacted and are not in the vibrant state that they potentially could be, in part because of, or entirely because of, the impact of man-made structures. So I've included him because of the work that young people are doing, which is incredibly inspiring. And I want to say, actually, I meant to say this before, but Rachel is Northwest Artists Against Extinction. We feel incredibly honored to have her great work, and hearing about her work and the reasoning behind it is, you know, it's all so aligned with the work that we're hoping to do. So it's great to have so many artists engaged in this way. Let's go to the next slide.
Britt, how many artists are part of Northwest Artists Against Extinction?
50, sometimes around 60. We have artists who are engaged in different ways. So we have a core group of artists that we have web pages for and are representing more regularly. We just finished a call for a poster competition, and I think we've got, you know, we're nearing 70, 80 people who are engaging in that way, and kind of always growing and figuring out how we don't grow too big too quickly. But anyone who's interested, please feel free to reach out to me. We're always, it's just such inspiring work to learn what other people are doing and ways that we can support other artists. Thanks for that question, Rachel. Alyssa Eckert is another young artist. I've included her work because we first were introduced to her in an exhibit called Honor People and Salmon that we hosted at the university, or in conjunction with the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington. We were able to collaborate with professors and scientists and community members and tribal members. It was a fantastic exhibit. School-age children came and had classes there, as well as obviously college students. And Alyssa, we also had the opportunity to include works by Rena Priest, who was the Washington State Poet Laureate at the time, and the first Indigenous poet in Washington State as a poet laureate. Sorry, she's not the first poet, she's the first poet laureate. She created a collection of poems. She edited a collection of poems called I Sing the Salmon Home. And this work, Run to Extinction by Alyssa Eckert, was inspired by that. And so I just want to point out the ways that other artists are inspiring by bringing artists of one medium in and together. They're inspiring works that are being created in the future and other artists to create great work. So sometimes we're reaching out to the general public or to policymakers. Sometimes the work is connecting with other artists for their incredible creative work. Let's go to the next slide. And lastly, Eileen Klatt started this work in 1998. She went to all of the 61 rivers in the Columbia River Basin where salmon were effectively becoming extinct. She has painted 61 pairs. These are life-size pairs. Sometimes she was able to trace the body of a salmon. So there are these sort of ghost sketches in the drawings of 61 effectively extinct salmon pairs in the Columbia River Basin. It is a very powerful exhibit, and often people are brought to tears when they see it. So it is just a living example of the ways that science. This was a 10-year-long project. It continues on, that she's continuing to exhibit it, but not creating new works. But very, very impactful. And we're fortunate to see what that kind of work can do in raising awareness. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Em. Thank you, Britt. For the next portion of the webinar, we are going to move into a panel discussion with some specific questions that I've prepared. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone, if you as a member of the audience have a question for one or more of the artists, feel free to drop it in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of those questions as time allows toward the end of the webinar. So the first question that I want to pose for the purpose of discussion is related to this idea of artistic activism and how we might or how we should define artistic activism. And I pose this question because there is so much room for interpretation around this concept. Britt.
Let's see. I love this question because I advocate regularly that activists can show up in so many different ways. I think it's common to think of activists out on the street protesting, where it's strong right now in many places across this country, which is, I want to just say, incredible work. And there are lots of different people contributing in different ways. And so to me, it feels like, again, artists are inspiring artists. Poets are getting their work out. And it is likely that so many of us who are creating work in this realm have no idea the impact of who we're inspiring and how people are voting or what conversations they're having with other people. And I think that actually is an incredibly powerful tool. Are the conversations that people have within their community, with their friends, family members, and any way that we can inspire that in a way that feels like people both want to engage and want to spend more time with it and want to learn more about it. Again, with art, often that's a very inviting way to come in rather than statistics that feel scary or challenging. So I think there is a huge, huge swath of opportunity for creative people and people who don't even imagine that they are creative to find themselves in a more activist position. That's how I define that or see that.
Let's go to M next. M, is there anything you would add to that in terms of how we might or how we should define artistic activism?
I mean, I think for sure artists are involved in underlining realities and inscribing new ideas and values, and the fact that they might exist in a gallery or on the wall of a building permits people to have different imagine different realities and possibilities from the world that we live in. I mean, I think the arts inherently express a kind of yearning for a less violent, a less ecocidal, a more just set of circumstances and systems to live within, right? Within which that we can flourish, not flounder. So yeah, I think the arts are a muscle that society can activate for all the reasons that, and ways that Britt describes, and they're central to, a democratic project. So yeah, more arts all the time and in every possible form. You need the artists who are, again, helping the activists really visually craft a compelling message. Um, Artists involved in these larger projects, which I just was able to kind of briefly detail, where you're able to have a sensual and poetic encounter that can transform your consciousness. So I think, yeah, that what that leads to later, I mean, it's not a linear like, oh, and then that person, was able to convince their legislators to enact the Green New Deal. I mean, it's not as easy to point to that, but the more that we are aware of our relation, and of course, the theme for that kind of joins all of the works that have been shown today is basically water, right? How it manifests in crops or, that farm workers tend to, or in rivers or fish. And like, yeah, there's no more essential relation between us and water like that. Awareness needs to be newly awakened around. So I think we're all aiming towards a similar goal in just these different ways.
Let's go to Miguel next. Miguel, what are your thoughts on how we might or how we should define artistic activism?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Em and Britt said. I think art is a powerful tool. And I think there's so many different mediums like poetry, there's visual art, there's animation. I also think about it in a sense too, where you can also reach children with art. You can put these ideas, of like caring for animals, caring for plants. Like I think about some of my favorite cartoons growing up, and some of the main characters were like all about loving animals, plants, life, and even something like that, you start to put these things in like say like animation, which is very captivating to children, and they start to grow up and see these things like, oh, my favorite character respected life, respected plants, respected animals. Like it can kind of like start to, grow that seed of caring. And to me, I feel like all the arts are a powerful tool and can definitely inspire. And like Em said, it's not going to be overnight. I'm not going to paint a painting of something and then a senator is going to be like, oh, I'm going to vote the opposite way now because of this. It's like, it definitely is nice to put these ideas and like, even just like have people have access to this information in an easy way, as simple as a video or a painting, for them to even just think about it for more than they wouldn't think about it.
Rachel.
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, I'll just echo everybody else. There's so many different types of artists and ways they're strategizing activism. But just speaking from my own work, I've experienced how art can really be a unifier, and kind of start from a place of wholeness and not divisiveness. And so when I paint a specific place, people of all different beliefs and walks of life may have experienced the beauty of that place. And so you just immediately start from this understanding of, yes, there's beauty in the world that is worth valuing. And I think when you can start a conversation from a common point like that, and be specific about it, like this place is worth protecting, then I think you recognize some common ground, and people are looking for ways to agree about something instead of starting from a point of divisiveness. So that's how I've experienced activism from my own artistic practice, is kind of this soft entry point. But I don't think there's any way to define, box in activism in the arts, because there's so many different approaches that are equally powerful.
I'm curious about all of your thoughts on kind of the time and place that we're in with respect to the arts with and an intersection of environmentalism. Do you see greater movement toward artistic activism on environmental issues now than in the past? In other words, does it resonate for to a greater degree currently, given the environmental problems that we're facing? Rachel, let's start with you.
Oh, let's see. I feel like that question is a little bit of a roller coaster because for myself, I think I oscillate between total disillusionment and hope and idealism. And I think that society is also doing that. You know, we have burnout, we have, you know, new inspiration, and it comes in fits and bursts. So I think the arts just reflects that. But in the end, you know, I'll keep being an artist, and I hope many other people will persist also and not become so disillusioned that the distraction culture takes over from true experiences of beauty.
All right, let's go to Miguel next.
Yeah, I mean, same with Rachel. I feel like, you know, especially in like these last few years, I feel like burnout has been real. You know, you fight for so much change and then you just see like these people that promise this change just do the opposite. And you kind of, I think, you know, just being aware of this cycle. It's kind of like an abusive cycle. You know, every election year is like, we promise this, we promise that. And then we just get a different version of the other version, you know, and hopefully that doesn't deter people from being motivated, you know, to use their voice, you know, for good. And I think I do see younger generations caring more about, you know, the planet. Obviously it's going to affect us more, you know, even the younger generations, like what kind of planet we're going to be dealt with in the next 20 years, 30 years. So I think there's definitely, you know, a little bit more care towards that, which hopefully continues, and hopefully we start to see some change, you know, that the efforts we're putting in are being received.
Okay, M, what are your thoughts on this question of you know, whether there is greater movement toward artistic activism on environmental issues now than in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the numbers that I see of people interested in majoring in not just art or not just environmental science, but a combined major testifies to the fact that this is, you know, a central issue for people's lives. So yeah, the number of majors is just constantly growing. So there's a huge hunger for learning how to make work that can again offer another perspective on the world and can kind of set the stage to create new realities. Two things I might add to that are the fact that I think artists are actually some of the most skilled people at dealing with chaos. And there's kind of no limit to the chaos around us right now. And yet chaos feels necessary on some level to engage in a really robust investigation. And so I've seen artists make surprising works and discoveries because they have learned to be comfortable within a sort of a situation that is, you know, would otherwise, I mean, and does occasion despair in many of us. And then I think also the genre of art making called social practice, which has emerged in maybe the last 20 or 30 years slowly, but now is gaining quite a bit of traction, where artists sort of like insert themselves and art within different processes, and the actual material that they're making with is sort of the social fabric. Like that is promising and pointing towards new directions.
Britt.
Well, as far as past and future, I was a little reluctant to make any claim one way or another, but I can recollect that a decade ago was speaking on a panel at a university around a museum exhibit around environmental impact. And a question was raised, you know, as an artist, do you feel like you have the opportunity, or are you experiencing a negative blowback for addressing environmental issues? And I feel like at this point, the answer is no. You know, there's that, nobody's even asking that question, because I think it's up in a way that we're no longer debating whether this climate crisis exists. We're at a different level of the conversation. And I think the number of artists and the many different mediums and genres that we're seeing represented in the conversation, in the greater conversation, is both hopeful. I love the word unifying because it feels so powerful to me. And as Rachel was talking about, also that easy entrance feels important to combat some of that chaos. Like, how do we come together for a broader conversation? So I do think the arts are growing and really important in the work we have to do, in creative visions for what's possible.
I'm going to pose one more question to the group, and then we will move on to questions from the audience. I think that oftentimes we think about social issues and environmental issues in silos. There's just a tendency in the way that our minds work to sometimes do that. That's certainly not always the case. And from the standpoint of the history of the environmental movement, certainly has not been the case. I'm curious if you all see greater convergence based upon the point in time that we're in of social and environmental issues within artistic activism. Miguel, I'm going to ask you to answer this question first, because this nexus is so prevalent in your work. I'm curious what your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so yeah, I feel like there is, I feel like the environment kind of affects all of us, and especially farm workers. And that's part of a big thing that I'm doing is, my activism involves creating work around farm working. And they're kind of on the front line of it. I think like every year, around 40 farm workers die from heat, from being out there, like they don't get the day off because it's like, oh, it's 100 degrees. And, a lot of times these people are being taken advantage of because of their status and, the fear that the employers put in the fact that they don't qualify for any benefits, like no PTO. Like if it's 110 degrees out there, they'll have to get out there like 2 a.m. They'll have to do all that. So I think there is a lot of things that overlap, especially like farm working and climate change.
Let's go to M.
I'm not sure if I have more to add. So maybe I'll just pass to other folks.
Okay. Britt.
I think as far as convergence, I'm thinking about work with a Lemmy artist, Sayalta Finkbonner, who in this past year I had the opportunity to work with her sculpture entitled All Our Relations. We traveled on a journey, and that concept of everything being connected, it feels to me like we have to be listening and learning from ancient cultures who really have and continue to embody that idea that we don't do anything in a silo, and that the influence, impact, and resulting, whatever that is, chaos or incredible solutions or healing or restoration, it happens in a way that all things are connected. And so convergence is essential in my mind. So I think it is happening more.
Rachel.
Oh, 1 sec. Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier about the art versus distraction. And I think that maybe we're getting to a point where we're really realizing that if we're not finding meaning and value in what's right in our hands and right in front of us and what's right under our feet, then, the rest doesn't really matter too much. So I feel like whatever disciplines and approaches are really regaining the sense of value and importance of just the physical world around us. Those different approaches can unite and find ways of sending messages together.
All right. So we are going to move to questions from our attendees. The first question, it's directed at Britt and Rachel, but I'm going to have all of you answer it. And it is simply as a reminder, where are each of you based? And we will start with Britt. Where are you based, Britt?
Personally, I live on Vashon Island, but we are in the greater Seattle area on Coast Salish land.
Miguel, where are you based?
Based here in Boise, Idaho.
And Rachel?
Also in Boise.
And M?
I live in Walla Walla, Washington, the former homelands of the Umatilla Cayuse and Walla Walla people.
Okay. So here is the next question from our audience. How do you, as artists, replenish your reserves of inspiration or hope in this time of disillusionment and burnout? Let's start with M on this one.
I mean, I think I'm constantly trying to cultivate forms of attention and care for the natural world, and making sure I have time to do that, whether that's by gardening or walking my dog, or being as much immersed and in conversation with the natural elements around me. I would say that those are the things that most enliven and solidify me as an artist. And and as a human, I've struggled to figure out how to give shape and form to that. I mean, I think there's a model of like going out and doing a landscape painting, right, which allows you to kind of achieve a quality of attention that borders on, a kind of mystical reverence for what you're seeing. I mean, that's just necessary in order to translate those images. But I haven't found a way to do that as a sculptor. So I'm always struggling. But yeah, that's what I seek out, is being in relation. Kind of like Britt says, like everything is connected. Like I try to allow that to be something that is present in my life, that knowledge. I try to manifest that knowledge and channel that into my art practice.
Okay, let's go to Britt.
Well, Rachel referenced the work of an artist as being, it's a solitary endeavor so much of the time. And the work that I'm doing right now feels incredibly inspiring to be able to connect with other artists. And whether that's a practice, whether that's something that other artists are doing as work, or I just highly encourage other artists to connect again with others who are doing creative work, who are thinking outside of the box, who it's one thing to connect with collectors and galleries and museums. It's a really different thing to connect with people who are devoting time and lots of thought into alternative ways of seeing something or experiencing something or connecting with people. So I find that when I am questioning what it is that I'm doing with my work and time, and is it making a difference, and to have the opportunity to connect with other artists is And like I said, and artists of all different kinds, of all different ages, different, I think that can be sort of a limiting, are you other painters or sculptors? And I just encourage people also to really expand that definition to ways that they may not even have ever considered. That's where I'm finding inspiration these days.
Rachel, what about you?
Yeah, I'm just getting back out into nature, and I guess it depends on what state I'm in, whether I need to connect more with other people, or with myself and my subject, which is landscape. Kind of both needs pop up at different times, I guess. But so it's a balance, and I find if I keep that balance intact between connection and a little more introspection, then that helps fuel my creativity.
Miguel, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, sometimes it's not creating art. It's taking time to go skateboard, hang out with my wife, take my pugs on a walk, just like maybe do nothing that involves art. But a lot of times I think what kind of like replenishes like that, like, so I don't get burnout, is a lot of times too, just seeing the response of, you know, people who grew up similar to me, like first generation Mexican American, to see the joy that they experience from the work that I create, even if it's just painting like, a nopal or a cactus, imagery that we're familiar with, or taking my parents to go see a mural I did and seeing the joy, and like just seeing how happy they are to see their faces represented in the art, to see themselves finally seen. I feel like anytime I do an art show, I feel like it kind of fills up that cup, where I'm like, okay, what I'm doing is like good, like, this is what I didn't have growing up. So hopefully the next generation, growing up here in Idaho, has art that can inspire them to, be artists, to think that they can also make a living as an artist. Because it definitely was something that I didn't have in mind, because I never saw myself represented here in Idaho.
So this next question is related to the one that you all just provided your thoughts on, but I see it as being perhaps a little bit more more personal, more tactile, more related to the practical, and that is, I am a novice artist and poet. I would like to hear how each of you get into the flow or the zone for creating your work. Do you have any activities, prompts, practices which inspire you to create art through your connection with nature and activism? And I'm going to open it to the full group here. Anyone want to weigh in on prompts, practices, activities that personally inspire you that we haven't talked about?
I guess for me, I've had a practice for many years of doing a daily painting, a little 3x3 daily piece. And yeah, I think what that does for me is it makes me be more observant, and for the rest of the day, or before I've created my piece, I'm looking around more. I'm noticing things, and just that attention, I think, is what. It's hard to look around and not notice something beautiful and become re-inspired and eager to go work with it.
I'll say I often think about the place of inspiration as being not doing something that seems like it's creative. For me, it's going out into the natural world and not needing to get to an end, to get to a summit or something, but just to spend time sitting by the water and listening, in a place that allows for a different part of my brain or my experience, or different kind of learning. And that's where the majority of what I find inspiring, where it's fostered. But it's really important for me to not do it in a way that feels like I'm looking for creativity. I'm just looking for learning, looking to listen.
Yeah, I think for me, doing research, sometimes, researching maybe what you're wanting to talk about, maybe looking at other art, I feel like can always lead to inspiration as well, if you're kind of sitting there not knowing what to do. And also I think too, not forcing it. Like I've learned through my practice that I'm not a person that can just sit there for 8 hours, look at a sketchbook and have an idea come to me. Like I have to go out into the world, it could be walking my dogs and I'll get an idea, or it could be washing dishes. Like I think for me, I've learned that, the traditional way of just sitting there with a sketchbook and just trying to draw ideas leads me nowhere. Whereas like kind of just like interacting with the world and just going about your day and like keeping some of these ideas in your brain is like, that's kind of where I get my best ideas. And then from there, I sit down and, jot them down and start working them out.
Anything
Not much more to add, but having a dedicated space and time, and like how Rachel found like a form that she can, commit to, are all really useful strategies. I personally like Taylor Swift. I like to put that on and move around to, it always opens up something in me. So as embarrassed as I am to admit that. I think she's a great artist, so not totally embarrassed, but yeah, whatever it takes to loosen yourself up. And you're trying to transform your own consciousness as an artist. You're trying to see something new. If that means using the other arm, or I don't know, think about Picasso. Art always has one leg in chaos. And so trying to put myself in that situation, not creating necessarily a stable thing and then expecting things to flow from that, but creating instability.
All right, thank you. We have time for one more question, and I actually want to kind of pose this as a two-parter. And I'm interested in each of your thoughts on it. The first part of the question is, do any of you have any recommendations for how to engage with other artists from an artist's standpoint? And the second part that I want to ask, because I think this is a really important component of today's webinar, is how can artists be better supported in this work? Let's start with Rachel.
Oh, oh, those are both pretty big questions. Connecting with other artists. But I guess I feel like most artists I've met have such an intrinsic respect for what each other does. I guess I feel like that connection has been pretty easy. We all know how difficult it is to work in an echo chamber sometimes and put your ideas out there. And as Em was saying, like live in pretty structureless chaos inherently and try to find some order in that. So I'll leave someone else to say more about that. But and then the second question was,
how can artists be better supported?
I'll be better supported. Oh, that's so multifaceted. I think for my evolution as an artist, as I've come to expect more, I don't think we're necessarily needing to live in a starving artist's reality anymore. I think artists have a lot of tools at their disposal if they have access to them with the internet, and immediately reaching your supporters with your images and with your work instead of always having middlemen. So yeah, obviously there's it's not an easy time to be an artist at any point, but I feel like it's gotten easier, at least from my perspective, to be able to reach a greater audience more easily. But there's 1,000 ways that would make it easier. So I'll pass that on to somebody else.
Let's go to Miguel next. And I know that was kind of complicated in my two-part question there, so let me know if you need me to repeat either or both of the questions.
So the first question was just basically like engaging with other artists. I would say social media is a big thing, especially nowadays. Like you can follow your favorite artists, you can follow your local artists, and you can comment on their stuff. You can DM them. For me, you know, anytime an artist sends me a direct message, like asking for advice or just being like, hey, like, you know, any of that, like I always love that. And I always love sharing my resources. The majority of us do, you know, like I have other artists that I always ask for advice, or you know, like we all kind of know what it's like, you know, to be in those shoes. And you know, like don't be afraid to just ask for any advice, or even just say like, hey, I'm an artist as well, like do you have any tips? You know, feel like the majority of us are pretty welcoming, and if they're not, then you know, forget them. And then what was the second question, Will?
How can artists be better supported in this work?
That's a, I feel like Rachel said mostly what I was gonna say, but I would say also a big part is, you know, paying artists properly for their time. Um, that's like the biggest thing. As far as like me being an artist, that's been like the biggest thing to allow me to continue, you know, developing what I do, is being paid properly for my time, because at the end of the day, it is our income, it is our livelihood. um so I think just like, you know, something as that, like I feel like is a big part of it, because it allows them to focus more time into, you know, developing their craft, you know, thinking more about these issues.
Let's go to M next.
Yeah, I mean, same story. Keep asking that question. How can we support artists? Pay them. But just, yeah, asking that question at every level of your ability to do so. In terms of talking with other artists and connecting with other artists, I think showing up to openings and art spaces and asking about process. I think that's an easy entry point. Process often makes up for the poverty of our intentions, and a lot of things happen, but a lot happens between the moment of sort of like, oh, I might make this, and then the actual thing that results from that, you know, whether that's a fight you had with a material, or, you know, an idea that occurred to you that seemed stronger than the initial idea, and then you decided to follow that. Like, ask people about those things. It's kind of wildly fascinating to hear those stories.
Britt.
I don't know that I have anything additional to say about connecting. I agree with all of the other panelists on, you know, get out there, whether it's social media or art openings, etc. Take classes, just reach out. Don't hesitate to reach out. That's one of the biggest ones, I think, is that people are not as far away or protective of their space, I think, most of the time as you might imagine. So take a risk, reach out, and yeah, paying artists for their work. I think amplifying work, you know, if that's what is possible, to get great work out there and talk about it and introduce artists that work that you like to people that you know, and just help get them more of a platform, which in turn hopefully is helping them get paid as well. So sometimes it's money, sometimes it's illumination. Support the work of artists.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Miguel, M, and Britt, for providing us insight into your work and your thoughts on these big questions. And thank you to our attendees for your thoughtful questions as well. This important work to defend iconic Western landscapes, fight climate change, and protect imperiled species that artists are doing, and groups like Advocates for the West and Northwest Artists Against Extinction is only made possible thanks to folks like you who are with us today. If you feel inspired, we hope that you will give a gift to help us continue this important work, and will continue to support artists through the work that they're doing. I will be sending out a follow-up email, including links for that contain more information, and to the recording of today's webinar on YouTube. Please feel free to share it with anyone who you think might be interested in our work. I will note that next week, April 29th through May 2nd is Idaho Gives. This is an annual event to help celebrate nonprofits in Idaho and an annual opportunity to raise money for the important work that we're doing. Stay tuned to our emails and social media if you want to learn more about that. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
have a good
you.
one. Thank you, everyone.